Hello, everyone. This is John Vegas. Welcome to Maximizing Your Potential, a show about theories, and insights that you can utilize to live a full life, achieve your desired goals, and maximize your potential. I'm excited to introduce you today to Amy K. Hutchins, a speaker, author, coach, and master communicator. Amy's a sought-after speaker within our Vistage community, which we'll get into in a little bit, but she's also published a number of books and has really done an exceptional job of helping leaders think about how to have productive conversations. As she describes it, I'll let her tell her in her own words, how to have one conversation at a time. Amy's a sought after international award-winning speaker as well. And I'm really excited to be with her today. So welcome, Amy.
Thanks for having me, John. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, I know you've done a lot of work in this area of communication, and I'm excited to talk to you personally about just the impact that having good productive communications can have in the workplace, but also at home, which I know are two areas of your expertise. So tell me a little about your work and how you got into this field.
I am a teacher through and through. So the common thread that just weaves through everything is education. So I literally started off as an elementary school teacher. I became a teacher trainer in our international school system. I was a corporate sales trainer in a billion-dollar consumer product company. And then I left that to start my own training company. And then it morphed into leadership and consulting and coaching and keynote speaking around the world. And so that is just sort of the world that I play in. And yet it is always about that critical thinking that I love to say that I stand at that intersection of critical thinking, leadership, and communication. And you're just watching stuff come from all directions. So that's sort of my background.
I like that. I mean, it is really large around how do you bring things together, right? And how do you build an operating system or model to be able to articulate your thoughts and to be able to inspire people? So what are some of the things that some of the best leaders do in this area that helps them be so effective?
Well, the classic, which I'm sure I'm just validating what everybody's already heard, is that you ask those bigger, better, bolder questions, but you're not really looking for that surface answer. You're looking for that deeper lesson, that deeper insight, that sort of provocative perspective. So I'm a geek. My background is in brain and neurology, and I love to talk about philosophy too. But Socrates posed that fundamental question, what am I missing? And I think that when a leader asks that question, when they're vulnerable enough to say, okay, I'm smart, I've got expertise, I've got experience, but then what am I missing? Then you expand possibility and you expand potential, which, hello, is what you and I are very aligned about.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that sounds great. Now, one of the things that I thought about, and particularly in preparing for our time together, is the ability of leaders to be able to listen effectively, right? I mean, as part of communications, typically it's a two-way vehicle whereby people are able to articulate and things are important to them, but also being able to listen. So how does listening play into people's ability to communicate effectively?
Oh, just slightly huge. So one of the things that I talk about a lot in the trainings that I do is a subset of EQ. We've all heard about emotional intelligence. We all know what it is, but there's this subset of it called empathic intelligence. And the whole thing is that you have to have the ability to listen with such discernment that you then respond more sensitively, more perceptively to the person in front of you. And so what happens is when you really stop and you listen at a whole new level of what's going on just behind the words, you get a chance to respond far more thoughtfully so that the person in front of you feels seen, heard, and understood at a level that's even surprising to them.
Yeah, I'm sure feeling heard is a key contributor to having meaningful conversations with people. One of the things, as you talked earlier about the brain, so I'm fascinated by how people's brains work, right? Like 2 billion neurons of activity happening at any moment in time, and so much of communications is an interplay between two people. So just tell me a little bit about what's going on in people's brains. And myself as I coach executives, right? Some are extroverts, some are introverts. So how people process information, right? But also being able to exchange it in a meaningful way, it being so important. So what's actually going on or happening for people as they're going through the art of communication?
I think one of the most important things to remember is that there's never just one conversation happening in that moment. So you and I are having a dialogue. My internal self is having a dialogue of what does this conversation say about me? Or you're having the conversation inside your head of what does this conversation say about me? And then it's also coming through all of our filters and all of our prior conversations. So when people get triggered, it's coming through the shadow and the wound. And if I come to you, here's a great example. If I come to you and I say, Jane's got to go. Like, Jane is just an underperformer. I'm tired of dealing with her nonsense. You're then sitting here thinking, well, I hired Jane. So are you saying that I made a bad hire? Do you respect me? Do you still accept me? Do I belong to this group? Like, have I lost, some respect in your eyes? And so that's your internal dialogue that's also happening outside of the conversation. And so what I'll often tell really brilliant leaders is think about the conversation that you could hook or that you could trigger that's happening that you're not a witness to. So to really think about like making sure that when you go to somebody, you're either unhooking their ego from it or you're addressing what you think their assumptions might be, because there's always that internal conversation going on.
Oh, such a great point. As I think about my own personal experience, both as an HR executive or running a business, right, where you're trying to convince the other person of what the decision is or what you're trying to compel them to go do or accomplish. But you're not necessarily listening or trying to understand maybe what are some of the points of resistance or why that person has a different point of view, which leads me to the point in question, right? It seems to me that often to be able to have most meaningful, productive conversations, it's good to be curious and to be able to ask questions and develop a deeper understanding of the other person's point of view. So one, what are some techniques that you've seen most effective, and what do you recommend leaders who are often trying to drive or promote accountability in organizations? I mean, they're trying to push, right, as opposed to pull, that they can do or utilize to be able to do it more effectively?
Well, I think for a lot of executive teams, it's that they don't hear that their voice really matters. So it's the idea that I'm going to tell you what I think we should do. I really want you to just nod, and then I'm going to go do it. Or I'm going to ask you what you think we should do, and then I'm going to listen to you, pretend that I took your ideas, and I'm still going to go do what I want. And so when leaders show up and they're here laughing because it's true, it cracks me up too. But and we've all been there, right? We've all experienced that. I think that when we show up to genuinely say, I want you to co-create the future with me. So you can't tell me what your sales, so you can't tell me what your sales goal is going to be. I'm going to give you a sales target, but we can co-create the how. We can co-create all the methods that we think, we could be working on. And so I think that that's one thing. And then to realize too, what are the resistance factors that are going to go into play when you go to roll out a new project or a new initiative or a new product or a service offering, whether those customers are internal or external? What are people going to resist? And then here's the conversation that we almost never have. And I think it's a great magical phrase. So let's just say you roll out a new project. You're my boss, John. And I'm not real, like my whole body language is like a little like, I don't know about that. Call me on it, but in a really gracious way and say, hey, Amy K, I'm sensing resistance. Can you tell me the thought or the emotions behind the resistance? Like, tell me what's going on in your head. But to genuinely invite a conversation allows me to then process, or to do it in reverse. You could say, hey, if the roles were reversed, John, I'm sensing some resistance and I don't really know why I'm resisting this idea, but if you're open to exploring it with me, let's take a moment to walk through it to see what's going on underneath it. But what most of us do is we're like, I don't know about this. And then we go off and we get all defensive, or we ruminate about it, or we don't actually think about it anymore. And then we never go forward aligned because we haven't talked about it.
Yeah, well said. Well, and it makes me think about conversations I've recently had with clients, right? Particularly people that I'm coaching, right? And it's whether in their ability to plan or execute or drive certain outcomes. And the specific point often comes from they believe there's a mutual understanding, or they believe like I've articulated the goal and you nodded, so therefore I assumed you were committed to achieving this goal. But they don't really get at what are the critical questions, what potential are the obstacles, how are we going to measure that, which I think is often more about communication. But I'd love to get your perspective on, what you see as you're working with leaders in both their style, but also the interactions and the impact that they have.
Well, I joke because I spent time in the UK as well for years working with Vistage UK, and we're divided by a common language. Well, we are right here in the contiguous US as well, and you nailed it. You're like we nod and we all think, oh yeah, these words that we just spoke, everybody understands what they mean behaviorally, and we don't. And so that's where I often encourage leaders to say, get agreement, not on the words, but the behaviors. So I do tons of sales trainings. And one of the things I tell sales leaders all the time is you could look at somebody and go, you've got to get better at sales. You got to get better at sales. They'll nod. But until you break down, what does better even mean? What does it look like, sound like, and behave like? You're thinking like they're going to get better at closing. Like, I'm just going to call more people. I'm just going to throw more spaghetti at the wall. And you're like, no. We need to work on your closing techniques. And so I love the idea before you leave a meeting, you get very specific on the behaviors, the action steps that people are going to take, and you get alignment around that before everybody just goes off on their own.
I love that. Yeah, I think leaving aligned, right? And with a mutual understanding, I think is so important, particularly around creating expectations, talking about performance, giving people feedback. One of the things I know you specialize in, or at least an aspect of it, is helping leaders work with difficult people, which often at the core of it is communication, but it could be whether it's intent or impact, but communication becomes such an important part of it. What do you see that good leaders do effectively to either disarm a person who might be perceived as difficult, or being able to at least lead with a common level of understanding and agreement when they're working with someone who may not naturally see things the way they see them?
I think that one of the best responses with difficult people is to lead with empathy, but not that as a buzzword. So let me tell you what I think empathy means, so we can practice what we're preaching right here and get a common definition of behaviors. So empathy to me means that you lead with a soft front and a hard back. Meaning, if I come at you too hard, then what happens is like I'm all blustery up front, but then you might be able to push by my boundaries, or I'll be inconsistent in my behavior because I'm a pushover after I'm blustery. But if I come in and I lean in to connect and I communicate to connect first, then I can have a hard spine of, hey, I'm connecting with you, but I have a boundary. I'm connecting with you, but these are my values. I'm connecting with you, but this is my integrity. This is where I draw the line. And there's a couple different ways, and they're all context dependent. I mean, the difficult person in every scenario comes with either their own wounds, their own background, their own hangups, their own triggers. So sometimes it's I remember with a gentleman one time, he said something that was so egregious that he actually made one of his direct reports cry. And then he calls me and he's like, this is ridiculous. She shouldn't have cried. And I said, you must be hurting to say something so hurtful. I said, so what was your intent behind that comment? What's going on with you? Wide open, total, completely different conversation than me just saying you shouldn't have said that, right? And then the flip of that is sometimes people are difficult because they have a little bit of a bully tendency because they're actually operating from a place of total insecurity and nobody's made them responsible for their behaviors. So I go all the way back to my elementary school days and my childhood psychology classes. And suppose that like you did something and you've been a little bit of a bully lately in the office, then I'll walk up to you and I'll say, John, how are you hoping that I respond to that comment? Or how are you expecting me to react to that, that behavior or that comment? And then I'll blend it with what was the thought behind it? Help me understand. So I've started now with a definitive, I'm going to put the critical thinking back on you, and then I'm going to have a soft front and a hard back. In other words, I'm here to understand, but it's still not acceptable. I'll listen so that we can move forward better, but it's not going to happen again. And so this is this beautiful dynamic that we use with difficult people to change their behaviors for the long term.
I love those questions because I do think it gets to a deeper level of thinking and probably even creates awareness on the part of the person, right, who's engaging in that way. And so much of it is people are trying to drive or rationalize their actions that they may not reflect or think about. What is it, the outcome that I'd like for you to be walking away with, or what was my intent? Great questions. I also love the soft front, hard back. It's good. It's a good way of thinking about it for all of us, right? Because I think so much about being a good leader is about being vulnerable, but also being able to listen and to process information and also to deliver it in a way that's impactful. So as you think about your experience of working with leaders, there's obviously the giving side of our communication, but as folks are on the receiving side of it and they are working with leaders who maybe don't communicate in the most effective way, what are some things that they could think about or do that might help them being able to shift or change the dynamic of that relationship?
Well, that's, to me, if I'm hearing you correctly, that's managing up. That's managing the leader that's not an effective communication. And one of the things that I think that's really important in that scenario is to not speak for all. So not to come and represent a group of people. And like, so John, you're the CEO of our company. There's 10 people on our leadership team. And I come to you and I say, we all wish you would communicate better. That's not helpful. I don't need to speak for all. But what I can do is I can come to you and I could say, this type of communication works best for me. This is what I need. So when you give me very specific deadlines, when you give me affirmation that I'm headed in the right direction, and I don't need you to micromanage, but I need like a weekly touch base point. So what I'm asking for is through the filter of what I need to be successful in executing your vision. That's a far more effective conversation to get change, because I've made it about help me help you, not just you need to change.
Right. I like it, especially because say like, here's what I need, right? Which I do think in any relationship, even a subordinate relationship, it's helpful if someone says, look, I work most effectively if, or in this situation or scenario. So I love how you articulated that. How does some of this apply at home, right? As I know you've done some work in this area as well. And as I think about relationships with a significant other or family members or children, we have the holidays coming up. People are likely going to be going home, which culturally is fascinating to me, right? Because having grown up in Puerto Rico, a very different culture, I have a lot of colleagues who, they're not thrilled to be going home to see their families because it just brings up all these dynamics, and invariably it comes back to communication. So, what do you see, and what's your recommendation for folks?
Well, I think first of all, let me put a little technical foul here. I was raised in a family with very intellectually curious, conversation-oriented, very inclusive parents. So right out of the chute, I had a little bit of a chance to have a bigger blessing and impact, but that is not the case for everybody. And I've witnessed where people, like as you share, they are not happy about going home because of different politics, different religions, different levels of inclusivity and belonging. And these are real. So one of the things that I think that's important, and I'm just going to give you some real practical tips. So I'm the queen of magical phrases, and I just want to share 3 that I think are really, really helpful for going home for the holidays. The first one is, might we agree? So if you find yourself in the middle of conflict and it's gone down a little bit of the bunny hole too far, just step back a couple paces and say, well, Dad, might we agree, that we all love our family? Or, might we agree that we want everybody to live up to their fullest potential? Find something that is pretty innocuous and step back to agree on that. And then you could say, and maybe we should just stop there for right now. And agree that we both love Uncle Charlie, or agree that we both, love flour, whatever you agree on. Maybe we'll just back up and agree to that for right now. So that's a wonderful thing. The other thing is to not talk in absolutes, but to use a magical phrase called a part of me. So suppose you're angry with me, and we've been talking about politics or religion or current events or whatever's gotten us triggered, and you're upset with me, or you're disappointed, or you're angry. Not to say I'm angry, I'm disappointed, but to step back and say, a part of me is angry, and a part of me is also really concerned, or a part of me is a little disappointed. Now, you don't say a part of me with something positive. So it's not like a part of me loves you, and it's because that's not going to go well. What you want to say is, I love you, full stop. I love you, and a part of me is concerned. Or a part of me is disappointed. And that's a beautiful phrase because it kind of takes the winds out of somebody's sails. It allows them to be like, oh, well, dad obviously, has other parts that still love and respect me. So you just create some beautiful wiggle room in the conversation. The other thing that I think that is really important is to ask the words, would you be willing? So you give somebody back a sense of control. And it's like, okay, well, would you be willing to sit next to Barbara? Would you be willing to start the report? Would you be willing to go for a walk? And what you're doing is you're giving them a sense of agency and self, capital S self, to say, okay, yeah, I would be willing. Or if they say no, then you could say, well, what would you be willing to do? And so I use this a lot with the kids, especially around the holidays. So what I'll say is, this is just a little jujitsu trick for raising children, but I'll say to them, would you be willing to feed the dog, set the table, or unload the dishwasher? And they'll be like, feed the dog. I'm like, yes, 1 down, 2 to go. So, nice. but it's not like feed the dog. So you're not directive. You're like, would you be willing? And you're going to get far more engagement. And that's just an easier way to get through the holidays. And I know we're just scratching the surface, but those are 3 things.
Those are good techniques. I like the a part of me thing. Because I think to your point, it sounds differently, right? As opposed to saying something like you are, or,
Right.
making definitive statements, which invariably causes someone to become defensive. I think that's great. And you talked about this a little bit because you mentioned politics. That was going to be one of my other areas of interest of wanting to talk to you about, right? Because we're in such a politically charged environment, and so many relationships have been frayed because of people's views and the inability to communicate effectively, or at least to withhold judgment. So what's your sense of the current climate, and how applicable are some of these recommendations in that context?
1,000%. I mean, politics is the fastest way to see a conversation go sideways if you're not ready for it. And so one of the things that I think that's really important is, and this is a mindset shift, and then it's a behavioral tactical shift. Stop talking about your opinion and start talking about experiences. So if you're having a discussion and somebody says, I voted for so-and-so, our first reaction, if we don't agree with that vote, would be like, why on earth did you vote for that person? Like right. What were you thinking, right? So that's going to be an internal thought. And then externally is to say, well, what's the experience that led to that vote? How did you get to choosing that person? Tell me about your experience along the way to getting to this affiliation with this person. So that takes practice. And I'm not gonna lie, that is so much easier for me to say on this conversation because I'm practicing, right. Saying things like that. But you could say, hey, what led to that? What's your experience? But I'm not asking you your opinion. I'm asking you, how did you get to that vote? Tell me more about what you've experienced and what you're hoping to experience as a result of that vote. By the way, that's a fantastic question because most people don't think about their vote in terms of this is what I hope to experience or I want my children to experience other than these big terms. So you can, and just be prepared that if that person hasn't thought about it, it could make them feel defensive. So again, it's choosing context and people to say, hey, I'm just curious, what are you hoping that vote's going to get your children? Or what do you hope that vote's going to get us 3 years down the line? But also, and this is really important, tone and tenor plays a huge role. So if you're sitting there like, well, what do you think that vote's going to get you? That's not what I'm teaching. That is not what I'm sharing. Right. It's truly coming with an open mind. And here's the other thing that I'm going to encourage people to say. There are times when people are not interested in having an open, constructive dialogue. It's all about getting your goat. And as soon as it's about getting your goat, I want you to think, oh, but I get it. I get it. And I'm going to take the high road. And I'm going to say, I love you too much to continue this conversation this way. I love you too much to continue this conversation this way. And I'm repeating it so that you'll get it in your brain. I love you too much to continue this conversation this way. And just take a step back. And that says that you've got your own volition, that you don't have to participate in that conversation or be treated disrespectfully.
I like that. I mean, very helpful. In particular, I think for people to think in advance of, right? Because some of it is if you think about how you might react in a given situation and you know that you could lean into that, then that certainly has potentially the ability to diffuse it, or at least to make sure that it doesn't escalate as rapidly as sometimes it appears to do.
Correct.
I want to pivot just slightly because I know you have experience with Vistage, and I know you were a member for 8 years, and have been a speaker for 22, and have gotten incredibly high ratings and are incredibly valued within that community because of all the great work that you do. So tell me a little about your Vistage experience as a member first, perhaps.
I love Vistage, and I think that part of the reason I joke I bleed teal, which is their logo color, is that it does exactly what I've been preaching since I was an elementary school teacher. And that is that, and I say this and you'll know it's genuine because I have been a speaker. One of the things that I love the most as a member was the executive session, where you've got this group of mastermind, really bright, strong, capable, smart people who get to pick the brains of everybody else to expand your perspective, challenge your thinking, get the optics wider so that you can go back and be a better problem solver and better leader in your own business. Now, I say that sincerely because I'm a speaker for Vistage, and I've had speakers come into my group. Speakers are wonderful. Speakers bring tools, and it's a nice value add for sure. But the number one takeaway for me was the executive session, where whether it was my issue or somebody else's, it doesn't matter. The gems that you're getting of here's how you solve that, here's what you don't do, here's how you avoid that problem, note to self, was just invaluable.
That's excellent. And how, just maybe one or two more questions. How did it help you with your business? Like, because obviously there's a lot around whether it's strategy or other things, but I'm just curious to see how it personally helped you.
Yeah, so it personally helped me in twofold. So I was there as a solopreneur, an entrepreneur, a leader of my own business, and really taught me things that, you don't realize how much you don't know when you start your own business. And you're like, oh, note to self, if I'd known that before I started. But it helped me to scale more efficiently. So I'll say that as a business owner. And then I also had an overlap where I was working as an executive in charge of operations. One of my consulting clients became more of a regular gig for a little while, like about 18 months. And it helped me navigate a lot of those politics as the outside consultant, now sort of permanently in there to finish the project. And so again, it was just the critical thinking, the strategy, the finances, the corporate culture, the operational efficiencies that I had not been exposed to, that was just eye-opening. It was a great educational experience.
That's fantastic. And I'm curious because I know you've been a terrific speaker for a number of years. How did you make the transition from being a member to making this a more permanent part of your offering and part of your business?
So it was the inverse. So I started off as a speaker for Vistage. And then one of the chairs was smart enough one day to be like, would you like to be a member of my group? And I was like, oh, yes. Yeah. So I joined. And then over the course of moving, this is how much I love Vistage. I moved twice in that 8-year time frame. And one of the things that I did, and I'm not exaggerating, one of the things that I did in my first week of moving to the new city was to find my Vistage chair that was in that local area. I know I've been in some groups where members will fly across the country to stay with their group. I wasn't at that, monetary level when I first started. And in my first year of Vistage, I moved, but I immediately got my next Vistage chair. And I think that one of the things that is so important is to remember that it's very hard to find a safe and sacred space to be confidentially vulnerable. And Vistage gave me that. As a speaker traveling around, you need someplace to go where you can quietly say what's going on as a human being. And as an owner of a business, who do you go talk to when you're the cheerleader and the rah-rah for everybody else? So Vistage meets a lot of needs.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've had clients as large as 2 billion, right? And they often talk about it's the one place they can go to truly have some of their answers questioned, which, the first time someone said that to me, right, I thought it was great, right? Because there's accountability between members, which is terrific. Now, I also know that you're a best-selling author, and I love the title of your book, so I want to make sure I get it correct. Get It, 5 Steps to the Sex, Salary, and Success You Want, and the Secrets Leaders Keep. So what prompted you to write that book? And just tell us about it. So
The Secrets Leaders Keep was one of those books where I wrote the whole manuscript that was sort of like the PowerPoint of like, here's how you are a great speaker or a great leader. This is what you do. And then I realized nobody needs that book. There's like hundreds of books like that. And so I literally walked out to the backyard. I threw it in the fire pit and I was like, what do people really need? And what they need is they need to know that they're not alone on how hard it is to be a leader. So that book came out after, I don't know, maybe 1,000 Vistage presentations that I'd given where I was working intimately with the groups in these workshop settings. And so I just did an amalgamation of the pain points that I'd heard in all of these workshops, and completely anonymous, but it was sort of like, I'm going to take these 5 pain points and I'm going to assign them to Dan. And then I'm going to take these 5 pain points and I'm going to give them to Jane. And so I made all these characters in the book that were identifiable and relatable as to why leadership is so hard. And then that book took off as an Amazon bestseller because it was like, oh my God, I see myself in this leader and here's how I get out of this pain.
That's so valuable. Because I think to your point, I mean, most of us, when we see it through others' experiences, or at least we can relate to those stories, and it really helps us to maybe ask a different set of questions or show up differently. So that's excellent. That's very powerful. Yeah.
And then go ahead.
Yeah, no, you go ahead. I'll ask.
Oh, I was just going to say, the Get It book was just these magical phrases that I love, like a part of me and how might we, and would you be willing? And of course, there's tons of them in the book, but I realized on coaching calls that I kept sharing these phrases over and over and over again. And now I've got a couple hundred of them, but I gave like my top ones in the Get It book. And that's just good practical information to make your next conversation go a little easier.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think specifically for me, right, in my training as a coach, so much of it is asking the right question, but also it's like the timing of the question, and really helping other people get to the answer, right? Because I think some of the times leaders want to give folks the answer as opposed to allowing, others to come to their own answers or conclusions, which I think is so powerful. So how would listeners get to learn more about you if they want to kind of explore further and maybe explore a relationship with you?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, there's two just super easy ways. It's my first name, Amy Kay. You can go to amykay.com, and there's all kinds of information and free tools. So generosity is one of our core values here. So we have lots of free resources. If you join our community, I give away free material every single week, which is fun. And then for women leaders, we also have shegetsit.com. And so we have a lot of programs for women leaders, specifically navigating in a gender a different issue workplace and navigating politics that way, and negotiation and conflict resolution. And then, of course, we have our iconic inner circle for just 8 women every year. We work with women sales leaders exclusively for that special program, but shegetsit.com. And again, tons of free resources. So I'm not here pitching anything but support, because what fires me up is you having a bigger, better, bolder conversation that moves you forward.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, you show up authentically. I love your energy. You've had great success doing this work. So I really appreciate you sharing with us. And I think it's great for you to be able to give people a way for them to connect with you. So that's awesome.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
I love what I do, and it's been a delight to connect with you.
Same here. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. And I look forward to catching you again soon. All
right, Turgan, from my heart to yours, John. Hugs.
Take care. Talk to you soon. Thank you, Amy Kay. Have a great day.